Welcome to They Live by Film. My name is Adam Lundy. Thank you for joining us. We are going to be going over another tier list today. This time we're going to be doing something a little bit more fun, a bit more freewheeling. We are going to be ranking movies that are beloved by film bros. For those who are unaware what film bro even means, here's a really good definition from Urban Dictionary. So a film bro is a person who views themselves as a huge film nerd while having mostly surface level knowledge of movies. Favourite movies include such underrated gems as The Dark Knight, Pulp Fiction, Inception and Jurassic Park. Some of those we might talk about. This last part says they also adore the MCU. I disagree with that. They actually are very anti-MCU, very anti-genre film. They are after true cinema, which you'll find is pretty much all mainstream movies, apparently. So once again, we have our lovely tier list from S all the way down to F, and I'm going to be looking at these films in three categories when I'm ranking them. Number one, how influential they are. So very similar to the last tier list video, how influential were these films on later films that came. Number two, the Adam influence. How much do I like it? Do I actually enjoy watching this movie? And number three, how insufferable are the fans of this movie? This is a very important metric when we talk about these movies because they have very rabid fan bases and they kind of measure on all different scales. So we're going to look at that number three. How annoying are the people who love these movies? So first off the bat, we are going to talk about Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, classic gangster film. I think pretty much everybody who watches this film likes this film. It's a great film. So from a checklist point of view, Adam liking it, my own personal opinion, this is a 10 out of 10 all-time great movie. It's incredibly influential. As far as I'm concerned, if you've had a Community episode take full homage to your movie, you can count yourself as pretty influential on the rest of art and cinema in general. And luckily, Goodfellas fans, they're not really vocal, which is always a good sign. I've never heard somebody shout rabidly about Goodfellas, probably because Goodfellas is very easy to like, which is something that really helps it, I think, because there's other films that are going to be in this list later where they're not necessarily great films, but the fan bases will try and make you think otherwise. Whereas Goodfellas fans, and I think to an extension Scorsese fans in general, they know good movies for the most part. They're pretty chill people. Goodfellas is a great film. This is our first film off the bat, and it's going straight into the S tier. I don't think anybody could argue otherwise. It's a 10 out of 10 movie, super influential, and thankfully fans are not annoying. So the next film we're going to talk about is the Chris Nolan film Inception. Might not be the most obvious kind of film bro movie, but I think it definitely qualifies. And I'm going to say that purely because, like a lot of people who are into film, I was once a film bro. I was once someone who had a very surface level knowledge of film. And honestly, Inception is the film that got me into movies. It came out when I was 16, and I was just hooked on movies ever since. I wouldn't be sitting here talking about movies and doing podcasts and stuff if it wasn't for Inception. So I have to give it credit purely because of how influential it was on me. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't know if I can say that I still love it now, but I have very fond memories of it because of how important it was. It was kind of influential in a way that it got a lot of people wanting to watch films that were a bit more heady, that were sort of action films but with like a bit more intellect behind them. I'm not going to sit here and say Inception's the smartest movie ever made. It definitely is not the smartest movie ever made, but it definitely got mainstream audiences a bit more interested in this kind of stuff. Like Inception walked so that Denis Villeneuve films could run is probably the best way I can put it. And sort of like Goodfellas, Inception fans are not vocal, which is always good, unless you're me. Obviously I'm very vocal, as you can tell right now, but I'm not going to sit here and say that Inception's the greatest movie ever made. But it's my list and it's incredibly influential to me, so I'm putting it in the A tier because it's definitely not a bad movie. I don't know if it's as good as people were saying it was when it came out. It was being hyped as one of the greatest all-time movies, and it's a great theater experience. A very bombastic film, great visuals. It's the same problem that a lot of Chris Nolan movies do, that the writing seems a lot smarter than it actually is, and the script isn't all that great. Characters are very one-dimensional. But it's a great action movie. It's a very important movie to me, so I'm putting it in the A tier. It's probably more B or C tier movie if I was being wholly objective, but I'm not because it's my list. So Inception, A tier movie. So when it comes to Pulp Fiction, which is the next film we're going to talk about, I'm going to start off by saying, regarding Quentin Tarantino, I'm very bored by Quentin Tarantino. I don't find him very exciting, especially definitely not as exciting as I did maybe when I was first getting interested in film. And I get excited for Tarantino to the same level I get excited about a cover band at a bar, where I'm sitting there and I'd be like, yeah, if they played the song, by this band that I like, that'd be pretty cool. And then they play it and like, yeah, that was pretty close to the real thing. That was kind of fun. And I feel the same way about Tarantino movies. He's so indebted to so many other filmmakers that it's like a little novelty, when you see him reference, like a wuxia film or some French New Wave film. It gets very grating and boring over time for me because I feel like the man himself has no real true identity, because all he does is just hop and skip between different references of different films. And, his filmography is kind of summed up by Pulp Fiction as, his big, real, proper breakout. Obviously, Reservoir Dogs was his first, full film, but the world got to know him really with Pulp Fiction. And rewatching it, I actually don't think it's all that great. There's a lot of it that's pretty boring. That whole Bruce Willis segment is frankly terrible in my opinion. But it is influential, so we have to give it some props there. It did kick off a lot of these sort of indie crimey, sort of talky movies in the 90s especially. It was a huge cultural influence. I mentioned Community earlier. They do have a whole Pulp Fiction skit in Community, so I do have to give it props there for influence. But I certainly don't like it. And Quentin Tarantino fans are very annoying in general because they don't realize how much of his work is not original and that he simply just takes and covers and steals, whatever way you want to put it. Homage is what he would like to call it. But I feel that what he does is well beyond homaging things to straight up stealing them. So I'm at a bit of a crossroads with Pulp Fiction. So I'm going to put it in the C tier. I think the C tier isn't bad by any means, and we'll cover this again later on. A, B, C, all pretty respectable. I'll put it in the C tier purely because of how influential it is. It's obviously a hugely well-known film. Massive sort of pop culture hit. I just don't particularly think it's amazing, and the fans are quite annoying. So Pulp Fiction is going in the C tier. One thing you'll start to find when you sort of look up lists of Film Bro films is that there's quite a lot of overlap between Film Bro movies and movies that feature literally me characters. If you're not aware of the literally me memes, it's essentially films where they have a male protagonist where a lot of teenage boys or incels or whatever will really relate to them because they're sort of weird loners, and they'll always say, wow, he's literally me. And Drive is one of the sort of most well-known literally me movies. It's by Nicholas Winding Refn. It was his big breakout sort of American movie. It was a kind of a sleeper hit. It was an indie film for sure, but it has a really great cast. Ryan Gosling's the lead, has Bryan Cranston, Carey Mulligan, Oscar Isaac before he got really big. Cannot knock the cast, it's fantastic. The soundtrack is really, really good. But unfortunately, that's where a lot of the good things about Drive ends. I thought this movie was cool as hell when it came out. I think I was about 18 or 19 when it came out, and I thought it was super cool. And I rewatched it relatively recently, and for a movie that's just over 80 minutes long, it is so slow and boring, and the characters are so annoying. They make such annoying decisions. And Ryan Gosling is very insufferable. I actually don't mind Ryan Gosling. I have no problem with him as an actor. But his character is not cool. He's a weird dork. He just stands there sort of half smirking at people 90% of the time. He's not cool. I don't know why you would want to be literally him. He's a creepy, dorky weirdo. He's a creepy, dorky weirdo. The film is not actually very good. It's not very influential either. There's not a lot of people other than film bros out here talking about how much they love Drive. And the fans are super annoying because, like I said, they're all weird incels. So I'm going to put Drive on the E tier. It's not quite F tier material, but yeah, I've no interest in Drive anymore anyway. So this is another one of the films I mentioned during the introduction where I gave the definition on Film Bros. Dark Knight definitely qualifies. People will try and tell you that The Dark Knight is one of the greatest movies ever made. It is absolutely not one of the greatest movies ever made. It's by Chris Nolan again. It's a Batman movie, and you know, I'm not against comic book movies. I'm not one of those snobs. I'm a huge MCU fan. The guys on the podcast, if you listen to our podcast, you'll know that I've defended the MCU many times. Even if I'm a little bit fatigued at the moment. So this has nothing to do with the fact that it's a comic book movie. I have no problem with that. But The Dark Knight is a perfectly adequate movie. It is not bad, but it's nothing amazing, nothing special. Was it groundbreaking for when it came out? Yeah, sure. It was one of the sort of first of these gritty, realistic kind of movies. Movies that used to be goofy, but now they want to make them gritty and realistic and grounded. You know, like how they changed James Bond movies after Casino Royale. James Bond movies used to be goofy and fun, but then they wanted to make them super serious, and The Dark Knight is kind of the same. Batman movies used to be goofy, and then The Dark Knight, they were like, no, we want to be super serious. That's not a pun, by the way, unfortunately. I wish I was that smart to make that pun. The Dark Knight, my main problem, the pacing is terrible in this movie. I remember when I went to see this movie in the theaters in 2008 when it came out. Sat down, was watching the movie with a bunch of my friends. I was in school at the time, and the scene happened where the truck flips over and they catch the Joker, and a ton of people around me started putting their coats on, despite the fact that there's still like an hour left to go in that movie. The pacing is awful. Apart from Heath Ledger, pretty much everything is pretty muted. It's pretty average. I don't really understand why it's so popular, to be completely honest with you. And Dark Knight fans are annoying as hell. As I said, they'll try and convince you that this movie is the highest form of art and that it's one of the greatest movies ever made, when it absolutely is not, I'm sorry to say. So we are going to minimize this down. So where are we going to put it? That's the question. So make it a little bit bigger. I don't know. I can't really sit here and say it's a bad movie. I just don't think it's all that great. The fans are definitely annoying, but it is super influential. I think this is pretty much a great match with Pulp Fiction. We're going to put these two together. Pulp Fiction and The Dark Knight are pretty much the same movie in terms of influence, how much I like it, and how annoying the fans are. These are pretty much on par with one another. We could not talk about Film Bro films if we didn't talk about Taxi Driver. It would be a big disservice to Film Bros everywhere if I didn't talk about the film that they all had hanging in their dorm room in college. So Taxi Driver is a bit weird. I don't understand why people love it so much. It's not a bad movie. The main performance by Robert De Niro is iconic, fantastic. I just don't really see anything too special with the film itself. The Taxi Driver fans is that's the real stickling point here. Taxi Driver fans are the same people who love Joker. So you're gonna know the type of people I'm talking about. Incels and weird teenage boys. That are the people who those are the people who love Taxi Driver and love Travis Bickle in particular as a character. He's probably the OG, literally me. Characters. I don't know why people are so obsessed with him or so obsessed with this movie, but it's iconic. It's one of the sort of most iconic films that came out from the new Hollywood era, sort of past 1970 onwards, so we certainly have to say it's influential. I don't particularly love it, but it's certainly not bad by any means, and the fans are super annoying, but I think a film like this kind of trumps a lot of the other pieces. So I'm going to put on the A tier. I know it's just as influential as Goodfellas, but Goodfellas is a way better movie. So that's why Taxi Driver is going to sit on the A tier for me. Let's find something to fill out the other areas. Donnie Darko. Everyone saw Donnie Darko. At least when I was a teenager, Donnie Darko was like one of the movies that you had to see when you were a teenager. And I hadn't seen it for many years. I saw it when I was sort of 16, 17, and I didn't see it for a while. And I saw it, I think, last year or maybe the year before, and I was thankful and really surprised that it held up pretty well. I actually really like Donnie Darko. Obviously, everybody knows that the director kind of went on to do pretty much nothing. I know one of his films is has a bit of a cult following to it, but nothing like Donnie Darko. This was a huge kind of sleeper indie hit, breakout for Jake Gyllenhaal. Obviously, his sister Maggie is in it as well. Soundtrack is awesome. One of my favorite movie soundtracks. I think it's a really good film. The fans are a bit dweeby, nerds like Donnie Darko, and that's okay. I'm a bit of a nerd too. In fact, if anyone was watching a YouTube video ranking movies, we're pretty much all nerds, so I think that's okay. But Donnie Darko fans are super nerds, super dorks. That's all right by me. The movie's really good. The only thing that holds it back is that it's not actually all that influential. It kind of continues to be a kind of a sleeper movie. Not too many mainstream people will say that they've seen Donnie Darko. Probably everyone's heard of Donnie Darko. Whether or not they've actually sat down and watched it, I don't think it's as near in popularity as, say, Goodfellas, Inception, Taxi Driver, even beyond Pulp Fiction and Dark Knight. In fact, apart from Drive, this is probably the film that least amount of people will have seen. So, it doesn't have as much mainstream success as some of the other films, but for those who have seen it, pretty much all people really like it, and I like it too. I'm going to put it into B tier. B is not bad. Remember that. B does not mean bad. I'm going to make this one very short and sweet. Scarface is a terrible movie. Tony Montana is an annoying crybaby, and anyone who looks up to him or this movie is a weirdo. This is terrible. F tier movie. That's it. All right, we got to get a Kubrick movie in here. Kind of has to be done. I went with The Shining. That's the kind of one that has the biggest cult following, right? I think that's the one that has the most cult following. The Shining is really interesting. It's certainly a great movie. I'm a big horror fan, as listeners to the podcast would know. I'm a big horror guy. So I've seen The Shining a ton of times throughout different periods of my life. It's probably one of the sort of first sort of what we call real movies that I saw kind of growing up, purely just because I was a big Stephen King fan growing up, so it was natural I was going to watch The Shining. The Shining fans are super weird. They're such weirdos. There's a documentary called Room 237, and it is just full of schizophrenic people giving you their theories on The Shining, which is kind of darkly funny, so I'm going to give them props for being so dedicated to the cause. The movie itself is obviously great. It's influential as heck as well. Pretty much all these sort of A24 backed horror movies about existential dread, they wouldn't exist if The Shining didn't exist. So it's hugely influential. Great movie. The fans are absolute nutbag weirdos, but they are very entertaining. So they're not annoying. They're entertaining in a funny way. So Shining's going up with Goodfellas. That's an S tier movie. Let's fill in another blank. Fight Club annoys the crap out of me. This is another film that I'm sure a lot of people are going to be like this as well, because I like to admit to this kind of stuff. I thought Fight Club was awesome when I was a teenager. It blew my mind. I thought it was the coolest film ever. And then you go back and watch it as an adult with a fully formed brain, and you think, why did I ever think this movie was cool? These guys are assholes. The movie has so many mixed messages that it doesn't make any sense, really. There's no good message you can take from it, as much as it tries to convince you that there is some higher message here. The fans, they're kind of like Dark Knight and Pulp Fiction fans. They try and convince you this is one of like the all-time great movies, important movie, blah blah blah. And it's influential. It's obviously one of those movies like the ones I just mentioned that kind of broke into the sort of wider mainstream while being a little bit weird and out there, which is cool. Like, I have no problem with that, but this film goes beyond. It's very weirdly preachy, but not preachy about anything in particular. So the fans, they're just as annoying as Pulp Fiction and Dark Knight fans. It's probably just as influential as both of those movies as well, but I don't like it as much as I like those ones. I wouldn't be too keen on rewatching it anytime soon, whereas I would really have no problem rewatching Pulp Fiction or Dark Knight. Fight Club doesn't interest me at all. Not anymore, not these days. You can keep that weird macho but not macho, anti-consumerist but weirdly consumerist film out of my TV set. Thank you. That's going into D tier. The B tier looks a bit lonely. Let's give Donnie Darko a friend, and who better to be Donnie Darko's friend than Jesse Eisenberg. So The Social Network is a fantastic film. For those who maybe didn't think that they wanted to watch it because, it was about defending a Facebook or whatever, that's fine. The subject matter may not be the most interesting in the world, but the film is flawless. The script by Aaron Sorkin is amazing. The film's by David Fincher, who, like Fight Club, he is considered a film bro director. He made Fight Club. He's up there with like Tarantino as those kind of filmmakers. But The Social Network is very different from all of his other stuff. It's not really dark or gritty in an obvious way. It's very clean, very calculated. Really great movie, great film score. The performances from Jesse Eisenberg, obviously his breakout role. Andrew Garfield, the actual cannibal Armie Hammer also shows up. All around, it's a really, really great movie. I think the only problem with Social Network is, and this is why it has to go into the B tier, because it's not really all that influential. It is in one way that it got people really interested in biopics, but I'm going to call that influential in a bad way because I freaking hate biopics. There's so many of them now, especially music biopics. They really annoy the crap out of me. I feel like a lot of great storytelling can be told in documentary form. You don't really need to make a biopic of something 99% of the time. The Social Network just happens to be one that's really well made with a great script, which is why it kind of elevates the biopic format or the biopic genre. It really moves past that because it has such a great script and such great storytelling and great filmmaking. So I'm going to put it in the B tier here because it is influential in a really bad way because it has subjected us to so many terrible biopics over the last sort of 10 or so years. But it's also it's not really a huge sort of fan favorite. A lot of people who are David Fincher fans love it, but it's not widely beloved by the wider sort of film world. So I think the B tier, hanging out with Donnie Darko, I think they're kind of very similar films. Obviously not in subject matter, but in terms of influence and how much I like them, they're gonna sit there on together in the B tier, I think. Let's do one more film. Let's talk about American Psycho, the Christian Bale vehicle. This movie's kind of funny. A lot of people sort of hated on this movie for a long time. And I think it was down to that a lot of people didn't read the source material, didn't really have context for it, and were expecting just like a straight slasher movie. When really this movie is like, this is a funny movie. This movie's hilarious. For being a movie that features so much death and destruction and torture and horrible things, this movie is so freaking funny. It's a really, really great satire on sort of commercialism, consumerism, that kind of boardroom mentality, whatever you call it. Christian Bale's phenomenal in it, and I think it's going to go high. I just need to try and figure out where. So let's talk about it a little bit. It's not very influential. It's definitely not as influential as, say, The Dark Knight and Pulp Fiction. But it does have an edge over them in that the fans are not anywhere near as annoying. American Psycho fans usually are in on the jokes. They talk about how cool and fun the movie is, despite all the terrible things that happen in it. They're in on the joke. They won't try and convince you it's amazing high art or anything like that. But one could argue that it probably is high art. I think it's a really well-made movie. It's well acted, well put together. The script is great. Obviously, the source material is great. I read the source material when I was way too young to read the source material. Unfortunately, I was very scarred by it. But that's what got me interested in watching the movie. And I like it. I haven't seen it in a few years, but I've always liked it. Whenever I turned it on, I never walked away having a negative experience from American Psycho. So I'm gonna put this here in the B tier. I can't think of a better trio to hang out together than Donnie Darko, Jesse Eisenberg, or whatever his name is, the robot who runs Facebook, and Patrick Bateman. The perfect blunt rotation, as they like to say. So that's going to wrap up this tier list video. I have made a letterbox list that features all these films, plus a couple more I didn't get time to cover in this video. I'm going to make that public as of the time the video goes live. So if you want to check that out, the link to my letterbox is in the description. Come give me a follow. I usually always follow back, especially if you write reviews. I love reading reviews. for films that I've seen. So if you're a Letterboxd user, come give me a follow from the link below. Obviously the link to our podcast is there as well. If you are someone who has never checked out our podcast before, there is over 80 episodes. There is so much more of our thoughts that you can delve into, so the link for that is below as well. That's going to wrap up this episode. Thank you for joining me. Have a good evening.